Ben never wanted to be a hero, he just wanted to mop the floor and go home. But one sleepless night, he changed a little girl's life forever without even realizing it. Like stories that restore your faith in humanity? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more real feel fiction that hits the heart. Ben Harper never expected much from life anymore. 48 years old and bone-deep tired, he'd long stopped chasing dreams and had settled for survival. The fluorescent lights of Terminal C buzzed overhead, casting a pale sheen on the waxed floors he had just spent the last 4 hours scrubbing, polishing, and buffing to a dull shine. His cart rattled slightly as he pushed it down the long corridor, mop dangling lazily at one side, the trash bag on top bulging from discarded coffee cups and sandwich wrappers. It was nearly 2 in the morning. The airport was never truly quiet, but at this hour, the chaos had dwindled to a low hum. The occasional flight still arrived or departed, bringing a trickle of passengers half asleep or bleary-eyed, clutching bags and chasing connections. The world moved in slow motion during these hours, like the airport had been wrapped in a layer of cotton. For Ben, it was the only time he could think without interruption, even if most of those thoughts were grim and unwelcome. His knees ached with every step, a dull throb that echoed the grind in his lower back. It had been a long shift, even by his standards. The early evening had been filled with a toddler's birthday party in the central food court that ended in cake smeared across half the chairs and gum stuck under every surface imaginable. Then a leak in the ceiling near Gate 12 had forced him to mop while dodging irritated passengers and airport security who had no answers. There had been a clogged toilet, a broken vending machine, and a soda spill someone had politely walked through before he even got to it. He didn't complain, at least not out loud. Complaining didn't change the work, and besides, no one was really listening. Ben rounded the corner toward the final stretch of the baggage claim area. He could already taste the cold can of beer waiting for him in the fridge at home. Not that one can would do much anymore, but it was a ritual, something familiar. After that, he'd collapse onto his worn-out couch, maybe drift off to one of the old war movies he always watched but never finished. As he moved toward the far carousel, something caught his attention. At first, he thought it was just the creaking of the conveyor belt or one of those odd sounds airports made when no one was really around. But then he heard it again, soft, choked, and unmistakably human. He stopped, hand resting on the mop handle, and listened. There it was, crying. Not the kind of crying you hear from an overtired adult frustrated with a late flight or lost luggage. This was small, frightened, childlike. Ben turned and scanned the mostly empty space. The baggage claim area was enormous, and the only other soul he could see was a sleepy man trying to coax a suitcase out of the mouth of a jammed carousel. Then he saw her. She was crouched behind one of the information desks near the end of the hall, her face barely visible through a curtain of curly hair. A small pink jacket and a pair of too big sneakers marked her as no older than 6. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs, her arms wrapped tightly around a battered stuffed rabbit. Ben felt his heart squeeze in a way it hadn't in years. He left the cart where it stood and approached slowly, careful not to startle her. She didn't notice him at first, not until he cleared his throat gently and knelt beside her. "Hey there," he said, keeping his voice low and calm. "Are you okay?" The girl looked up, startled. Her eyes were red-rimmed and wide. She sniffled and gripped the rabbit tighter. "I can't find my mom and dad," she said in a trembling voice. "I was looking at the fish tank, and then they weren't there." Ben nodded slowly, crouching until he was eye level with her. He remembered the aquarium in the lobby, a popular distraction for kids and just enough of one, apparently, for someone to get left behind. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Emma." "Okay, Emma. I'm Ben. I work here, and I'm going to help you find your parents, all right?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Are you hurt? Did anyone talk to you or try to take you somewhere?" She shook her head quickly. "No, I just looked at the fish. Then I turned around and they were gone." "All right, that's good," You're safe." Ben looked around and saw no signs of approaching security or frantic parents. He fished out his radio from his belt and clicked it on. "Security, this is maintenance. I've got a lost child at baggage claim 6. Little girl, pink jacket, name's Emma. Can someone come down here?" The reply crackled through the speaker. "Copy that, maintenance. Sending someone now. Can you stay with her?" Ben looked at Emma. She nodded slightly, wiping her nose on her sleeve. "Yeah," he said. "I'll stay." He sat beside her on the floor, cross-legged and slow, feeling every crack in his knees as he moved. He reached over and picked up a lost glove someone had dropped nearby, slipping his hand into it and holding it up like a puppet. "What's your rabbit's name?" he asked. Emma looked at him, puzzled. "Her name is Marbles." "Marbles, huh? That's a good name. This here is." "Glovey," he said, making the glove wave awkwardly. "Nice to meet you, Marbles. Have you seen any fish lately?" Emma giggled in spite of herself. It was quiet and cautious, like she wasn't sure if it was allowed. Ben spent the next few minutes talking to her in that silly voice, making the glove argue with the rabbit about whether fish could talk. By the time the 2 security officers arrived, Emma was holding his hand. They knelt to speak with her and radioed for the family, who had already been calling in a panic. Within minutes, a man and a woman came sprinting through the automatic doors, breathless and crying. Emma bolted from Ben's side and flew into her mother's arms. Ben stood back, letting the scene unfold. The parents tried to speak through their sobs. "Thank you. God bless you. We don't know what we would have done." Ben just nodded. He wasn't good with attention. "Just glad she's safe," he said quietly. He filled out a short incident report, declined the offered money, and returned to his cart. As he pushed it back toward the service hallway, the buzz of fluorescent lights returned. The moment, like most of his days, faded into the background. Just another shift. Just another problem cleaned up. He never thought of Emma again. Not really. Not until years later when her name and his would be spoken in front of millions. The little girl's cries did not echo loudly across the terminal, but they pierced Ben's ears all the same. He had always been attuned to the sounds of people in distress, even if most of his job required him to ignore things in favor of keeping floors shiny and toilets functioning. This was different. There was a quiver in her voice, a tremble that tugged at something in him he usually kept buried beneath layers of routine and exhaustion. He knelt beside her again, making sure not to get too close too fast. Her tiny frame was hunched into the corner, knees to her chest, clutching a floppy gray rabbit that looked like it had seen better days. Her eyes darted toward him but didn't hold his gaze. She looked at him the way someone might look at a stranger on the street when unsure if they should ask for help. "It's okay," Ben said, his voice even. "You don't have to be scared. You're not alone." The girl didn't speak this time, but she didn't move away either. She sniffled again and tightened her grip on the rabbit. Ben eased down to sit on the cold tile, cross-legged, slow, and careful. His joints protested, but he ignored them. He rested his forearms on his knees and glanced over at her, keeping his expression soft. He had no kids of his own. That was a road long past, an opportunity lost in the folds of a marriage that dissolved years ago. But still, he remembered what it meant to be small and scared and invisible in a world that moved too fast. "I'm Ben," he said again. "What's your name, sweetheart?" She glanced up at him, eyes cautious. "Emma," she whispered. "That's a pretty name," he said, smiling. "Is your rabbit's name Emma too?" She shook her head and looked down at the toy in her arms. "Her name's Marbles." "Well, hello to you, Marbles," Ben said. "You look like you've had a long day, too." Emma's lips twitched at that. Not quite a smile, but not quite the quiver they had been before. "I was with my mom and dad," she said finally, voice small. "We were waiting for our bags. Then I saw the fish tank. They had blue fish, and one had yellow spots. I wanted to look at them for a little. When I turned around, they were gone." Ben nodded slowly. "I know where that tank is. It's easy to get distracted. You didn't do anything wrong." She looked up at him, a trace of hope entering her expression. "Really?" "Really," he said. "Grown-ups get turned around here all the time. It's a big place." Emma shifted slightly, so she was no longer hugging the desk. She leaned forward just enough to let her legs stretch out in front of her, still close to the rabbit. Ben saw that her socks didn't match. One had cartoon clouds, the other was plain white. He smiled to himself. "Do you know your parents' names?" he asked. "My mom's name is Sarah. My dad is Jason. We came from Florida. My grandma lives here. She was going to pick us up, but I don't know her number." "That's okay," Ben said. "We've got people who can help. Security is on their way. They'll find your parents." She nodded, but didn't seem convinced. He could tell she was still on the edge of panic, the kind of panic that rises in your chest like water, making it hard to breathe even when someone's telling you it's going to be all right. To distract her, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a clean, unused rubber glove. He slipped it on his hand and drew 2 eyes on the fingers with a pen from his shirt. Then he wiggled his hand toward her, voice turning slightly higher, cartoonish and absurd. "Well, hello there, Marbles," he said in a gravelly voice that was half pirate and half sock puppet. "It's me, Captain Glovey, and I'm here to declare you Queen of the Fish Tank." Emma blinked at him, clearly confused, and he made the glove slap itself on his head. "Oops," the puppet said. "I meant Queen of the Airport. Long live Queen Marbles." This time, a soft giggle escaped Emma's mouth. It was like hearing a glass bell in a quiet room. It caught Ben off guard, in the best way. She giggled again when he had the glove argue with Marbles over who got to rule the snack machines. "I like you," she said shyly, peeking out at him through a curtain of hair. "Well, thank you," Ben replied, doing his best glovey bow. "I like you too, Your Majesty." He checked the clock above the nearby carousel. It had been about 5 minutes since he called in the report. It shouldn't be much longer now. The airport was vast, and sometimes security had to jog from terminal to terminal, especially during the late shift. Still, he was alert. His eyes scanned the room for anyone looking like they didn't belong, or who might pose a threat. It was instinctual. People didn't think much of janitors, but he noticed things. The twitch in someone's posture, the way another lingered too long near the bathrooms. It came from years of watching life from the periphery. Emma had scooted closer now. She was sitting beside him, one arm still wrapped around Marbles, the other resting on her lap. She looked more relaxed, even if her eyes were still rimmed with the pink of recent tears. "Do you work here every day?" she asked. "Most days," he said. "Sometimes nights too, like tonight. Do you ever get bored?" He thought about that for a moment. "Not bored, exactly. More like quiet. It gives me time to think, and sometimes nice surprises happen." "Like meeting me?" she asked, her voice hopeful. He looked at her and nodded. "Exactly like meeting you." The moment was broken by the arrival of 2 uniformed officers hurrying toward them, one speaking into a walkie-talkie, the other scanning the area. "Is this Emma?" one of them asked. Ben stood, his knees groaning. "That's her." The second officer knelt beside Emma, offering a gentle smile and confirming her identity. "Your parents have been looking everywhere for you," she said kindly. "They're on their way here now." Emma's eyes lit up. For a moment, she looked like she might cry again, but this time out of relief. When her parents finally burst through the double doors, the reunion was loud and full of breathless sobs. Her mother dropped to her knees and scooped her into her arms, rocking her back and forth. Her father pressed kisses to the top of her head, repeating her name over and over. Ben watched from a short distance, heart tight. He always felt something in these moments. Not jealousy, but something close to it. A reminder of the people he'd lost, the choices he had made. But he was glad the girl was safe. That's all that mattered. The mother turned to him, tears streaking her cheeks. "Thank you," she said. "We were so scared. We didn't know what happened." I'm just glad she's okay, Ben replied, stepping back slightly. They tried to offer him something, money or a gift card, but he shook his head. He didn't need a reward. Security asked him to fill out a quick form. He did so, quietly, without fanfare. When it was done, he returned to his cart and resumed pushing it toward the exit. As he disappeared into the fluorescent haze of the maintenance corridor, Emma turned and waved, small fingers fluttering in the air. Ben waved back once, just once, then turned the corner. The sound of her voice had faded, and the world went back to its usual static hum. He would go home, finish his beer, sleep through the morning. He wouldn't remember every detail. He didn't know that she would. Ben didn't tell anyone about the little girl the next day. Not really. He mentioned it in passing to Walter, the old overnight supervisor who mostly kept to himself behind the cluttered desk in the janitor's lounge. Walter had been eating something that looked like leftover chili, the kind that came from a can and stuck to the sides of the bowl like glue. Ben sat down across from him, tugging off his work boots and wincing at the stiffness in his legs. Had a lost kid last night, he said. Found her by baggage 6. Walter looked up briefly, spoon halfway to his mouth. Oh yeah? Parents find her? Yeah. Security took care of it, Ben said. She was scared. Couldn't have been older than 6. Walter grunted and nodded, then went back to his chili. That was the extent of it. No one asked for more, and Ben didn't offer it. He finished his shift, clocked out, and made the slow drive home down the quiet streets of the early morning city. He lived alone, in a one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better days. The stairs creaked, the hallway smelled vaguely like boiled cabbage, and the heating worked only when it felt like it. Still, it was his. He dropped his keys in the dish by the door and opened the fridge. The beer was still there, waiting like it always did, just the one can. He cracked it open and sat on the couch, letting the familiar weight of sleep start to settle over his shoulders. The TV flickered to life with the sound muted. Some late-night comedy show played in the background, full of people who laughed loudly at things that didn't feel particularly funny. Ben leaned back, resting his head against the cushion, the beer cooling in his hand. His thoughts drifted to the girl again. Emma. The name stuck with him in a quiet way. He pictured her sitting on the floor beside him, hugging that ragged stuffed rabbit, her voice soft and brave. He remembered how tightly she had held his hand as they waited. She hadn't asked for it, and he hadn't offered it. It had just happened, a small hand sliding into his, as if she had known he would keep her safe. And he had. He thought about what might have happened if he hadn't walked that way. If he had pushed his cart out a different door, or if he'd ignored the sound. She would have been found eventually, probably. Someone else would have noticed. But maybe not as gently. Maybe not with puppet voices and glove puppets and silly jokes about snack machines. That was what lingered with him, the way her fear had eased, not because she was found, but because he had stopped, because he had taken the time to sit with her. He didn't think of himself as someone who made much of a difference in the world. His job wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even respected. Not really. People walked past him without making eye contact. They spilled things and assumed someone would come clean it up, and that someone was usually him. He didn't mind, not entirely. It was honest work, and it paid enough to keep the lights on. But it wasn't the kind of life that got remembered. Emma might remember him for a week or two, he thought. Maybe she would mention it to her grandparents over dinner, or tell her teacher about the janitor who helped her. Then life would move on, as it always did, and her memories of that night would fade, becoming softer and less detailed. That was how childhood worked. Nothing stayed sharp for long. The next day he went back to work. The terminal was louder, more crowded, filled with impatient travelers and barking announcements. No one mentioned the girl. Security hadn't posted anything. There was no photo of her in the break room, or any sign that the night had been different from any other. He walked the same hallway near baggage 6, paused by the desk where he had first seen her. The area was clean again. just another corner of the airport, no different from the rest. A man paced near the carousel, talking too loudly into his phone. A child nearby was whining about candy. Life had resumed its shape, the airport breathing in and out like always. That night, back in the lounge, Walter asked if he wanted to split a sandwich from the vending machine. Ben declined and went back to polishing the mop handles, not because they needed it, but because it gave his hands something to do. He didn't want to talk about the girl. Not because it hurt, but because it felt private, like something sacred. Time moved forward. Days folded into weeks. The memory of Emma became something quiet, tucked into a drawer in his mind he opened only once in a while. He thought of her sometimes when he saw other kids wandering too far from their parents. He thought of her when he found a lost toy under a bench or when he heard a child cry in the distance. But the world did not ask him to hold on to the memory, and so he let it be. His life returned to its rhythm. Morning coffee in the same chipped mug, the walk to the bus stop where no one made conversation, the hiss of the mop gliding across linoleum, the rattle of the trash cart. He grew older by fractions. The gray in his beard thickened, the knees creaked more. The world did not notice, but he was changing too. Years passed. He took a part-time role to ease the pressure on his joints, gave up the heavier shifts, and spent more time sitting during breaks. The airport brought in new janitors, young ones who talked about music he had never heard of and showed each other videos on their phones. Ben mostly kept to himself, occasionally offering advice about which vending machines liked to eat your money and which ones had the best snacks. The new hires called him Mr. Ben out of respect, though he told them not to bother. He never mentioned Emma again, but she never forgot him. Not through school, not through birthday parties or field trips or holidays where she watched other adults pass over the people who cleaned the floors and emptied the trash. Not when she sat down to write essays about kindness, or when teachers asked her who had made a difference in her life. And not, most especially, when she stood in front of a national audience 15 years later and told the world about the janitor who sat with her when she was scared, who made her laugh when she wanted to cry, who told her it was going to be okay and somehow made her believe it. Ben would not know that for a long time. He would keep living his quiet life, never expecting that the smallest thing he had done would one day be remembered by millions. But for now, he simply pushed his cart forward, listening to the low hum of the airport, unaware that a story was taking shape behind him, one that was waiting for the right moment to be told. The large room buzzed with quiet anticipation. Rows of chairs, elegantly draped in white linen, stretched from the stage to the walls. Warm lighting gleamed off crystal awards resting on a table in front of the podium. Cameramen adjusted their equipment while stage crew whispered into headsets, checking their timing and pacing. Beyond the curtains, the audience filled in slowly, mingling in the aisles, flipping through the program booklets that listed the evening's honorees. Emma stood backstage, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, trying to still the nervous energy that had been building in her chest all day. Her fingers were cold despite the warmth of the lights and the fabric of her dark navy dress. The awards ceremony had drawn national attention this year. Representatives from youth organizations across the country had come to honor service, leadership, and humanitarian impact. Emma had been chosen to receive the National Youth Humanitarian Award. It was the highest honor given to someone under 25 who had demonstrated a lasting impact on their community. She had given speeches before, of course, school presentations, debate tournaments, fundraising galas, even a TED-style talk for her nonprofit, but this was different. This was televised. This was real. Her face would be seen in living rooms across the country. Her words would be heard not just by strangers, but by people who had never heard her story, people who might never again. That mattered. And she knew exactly what she wanted to say. She had written the speech herself, though many people had offered to help. She had memorized it, rehearsed it, trimmed it, and practiced it again, but when she walked out onto the stage, she would not read it word for word. She would speak from memory, from truth, and from a moment that had lived in her heart for 15 years. In her left hand, she held marbles. The rabbit looked smaller now, its gray fur worn thin in places. One ear was floppy. The stitching around the eyes had come undone, and its body had grown soft from years of being hugged and held. But Emma had kept it through high school, through college applications, through heartbreaks and victories and long nights wondering how to make a difference. It had stayed with her through it all, and tonight it would be in her hand when she spoke. A stage assistant tapped her on the shoulder and gave her the signal. 1 minute. Emma nodded, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes. In her mind, she was 6 years old again, sitting on the cold tile floor of an airport terminal. She was lost. She was afraid. She was holding marbles and crying so hard she could barely speak. And then he had appeared, not in a superhero costume, not with flashing lights or grand gestures. Just a man in a worn uniform, a janitor with a kind face and tired eyes, who knelt beside her and made the world feel safe again. She had never forgotten the way he sat with her, never asked her to stop crying, never made her feel small. He had talked to her like she mattered. He had made her laugh with a glove-turned puppet, and he had held her hand without hesitation. When her parents had come running, breathless and tearful, she had not wanted to let him go. And he had smiled and said she would be okay. That kindness, that moment, had become a seed that grew inside her. It shaped how she saw people, how she treated others, how she believed in goodness. The applause from the previous speaker began to fade. Emma opened her eyes. The stagehand nodded again. It was time. She stepped out from behind the curtain, heels tapping gently against the polished wood of the stage. A polite wave of applause greeted her, and as she reached the podium, a hush fell over the room. The lights above her dimmed slightly, a single spotlight framing her from behind. Cameras focused in. Her face appeared on 2 large screens to either side of the stage. She placed marbles gently on the podium in front of her and let the silence stretch for one more breath. Then she spoke. When I was 6 years old, I got lost at the airport. Her voice was clear, steady. It filled the room without needing to be loud. I was with my parents, arriving in a city I barely knew. I wandered off to look at the fish tank. I remember the bright colors, the way the fish darted around like they didn't know anyone was watching. When I turned around, my family was gone. Just like that. I was too small to see over the crowds, too scared to yell. I curled up near a desk and cried because I didn't know what else to do. She paused and looked out over the crowd. People were listening, really listening. And then someone found me. Not a police officer, not a security guard, not an airport official, a janitor. There was a ripple through the audience, a shifting of posture, a straightening of backs. He didn't walk past. He didn't ignore me. He sat down beside me on the floor and asked me my name. He made me feel safe. He talked to me with kindness and humor. He took a glove from his cart and turned it into a puppet. He made me laugh, even though I had been crying just moments before. When security arrived and my parents came running, he stepped back. He didn't wait for thanks or recognition. He just smiled and left. Emma looked down at marbles and placed a gentle hand on the rabbit's worn head. I never knew his full name. He didn't ask for anything. He probably doesn't even remember that night. But I do, because that moment changed me. She lifted her eyes again. That janitor taught me more about compassion than any classroom ever could. He showed me what it means to see someone, truly see them, even when the world is rushing by. That moment, that choice, became the foundation of everything I believe in. Every volunteer hour I've spent, every community project I've led, every time I've tried to make someone else feel safe or hurt it traces back to him. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. This award means a lot to me, but before I accept it, I want to use this moment to say something I never got to say back then. Her voice trembled slightly now, but but she pressed forward. To the janitor at the airport, who sat beside a frightened little girl with a toy rabbit and gave her the gift of kindness, I remember you, and I thank you. You changed my life. There was a beat of silence, just a heartbeat, and then the room erupted in applause. Not the polite kind, not the forced kind. Real, thunderous, sustained applause that echoed off the high ceilings and filled every inch of the space. Emma stepped back from the microphone, hands still resting on the podium, eyes shining. Somewhere, miles away, Ben sat on a second-hand couch in a dim apartment, watching the ceremony play out on his television. The beer in his hand had gone warm. His eyes were wide, his breath caught. And though he had not yet heard her name or remembered her face, something deep inside him stirred. He leaned forward slightly as the camera zoomed in on the young woman holding a worn gray rabbit. And for the first time in years, a memory long buried began to rise to the surface. As the applause thundered in the auditorium, Emma stood quietly behind the podium, her shoulders square, her expression calm but lit from within. She held herself like someone who had grown used to speaking in front of crowds, but there was something different about this moment. She was not standing up there for personal glory or for the approval of dignitaries and donors seated in the front rows. She was standing for a memory, for a man she had not seen in 15 years, for a story that had shaped her life in quiet, immeasurable ways. Her words had landed. You could see it in the faces of the people around the room. Some had tears in their eyes. A few had clasped their hands to their chests. The cameramen, who had filmed 100 such events, paused longer than usual on her face. The moment had become something more than a speech. It was something human and true and impossible to rehearse. Backstage, the event organizers exchanged glances. Emma's story had not been part of the initial draft of the ceremony. She had added it herself, insisting that it mattered more than statistics about volunteer hours or graphs showing the growth of her nonprofit. It was not just a story about kindness. It was a reminder that people working in the shadows could change lives without ever knowing it. The producer in the control room, watching the live feed on multiple monitors, tapped his assistant on the shoulder and whispered, "Get me a clip of this for social." 10 minutes after the broadcast ended, a short video of Emma's speech was posted online by the Foundation's media team. They added a caption, "She never forgot him." The janitor who saved her became her lifelong inspiration. Kindness is power. Within hours, the video had spread across the internet, retweeted by celebrities, reposted by influencers, shared by strangers who had never heard of Emma before that night. But the man at the center of her story had no idea what was happening. Not yet. Ben had been flipping through channels when he came across the ceremony. He rarely watched live television anymore, preferring reruns or old movies where he could predict every line before it was spoken. He had not recognized the name of the award or even realized what the event was at first. It was the tone of the young woman's voice that had stopped him. Something in the way she spoke, a blend of certainty and tenderness, had made him pause with the remote halfway to the next channel. By the time she said the words, "When I was 6 years old, I got lost at the airport," his hand had gone still. His eyes narrowed, and he leaned forward, not fully understanding what he was listening to, but knowing somehow it was meant for him. He watched as she told the story, word by word, his heart starting to thump a little harder with every detail. The pink jacket, the fish tank, the glove puppet. When she said janitor, he lowered the remote and set it carefully on the table, as if afraid that even a small sound might break the spell. He sat there unmoving as she spoke about compassion and memory and change. When she placed the stuffed rabbit on the podium and named it Marbles, something inside him broke open. Ben had not thought about that night in years. He had filed it away, not because it had meant nothing to him, but because it had not seemed remarkable at the time. Just a moment, just a child in need. He had helped her, then gone home, like he had done 1,000 times before. But there she was, Her name now spoken by reporters, her photo splashed across screens, her voice echoing across the country, and she was talking about him. Not his name, not his face, but something deeper, his presence, his choice to stop and sit down beside her. The commercial break ended. The ceremony moved on. Other honorees were introduced. Other speeches were given. But Ben did not hear any of it. He sat on the couch, hands in his lap, staring at the television like it might explain something to him that he had forgotten how to ask. The news cycle picked it up the next morning. Emma's speech was everywhere. Morning shows played the clip. Talk show hosts quoted her words. Online forums lit up with speculation. Who was the janitor? Where was he now? Someone must know. The story became a mystery wrapped in warmth, a feel-good moment in a world that rarely slowed down to honor them. Hashtags began to trend. Find the janitor, Marbles and Ben, hero in the shadows. Journalists reached out to the airport named in the speech. Phone lines rang, emails flooded inboxes. But the janitor's name had not been given. Emma had not remembered it. She had only remembered his voice, his kindness, and the way he made her feel seen. At the airport, staff started asking around. The security team pulled the old incident reports, dusty folders with notes from years ago. It took a while to find the right one. Some entries were smudged or incomplete, but eventually someone found it. Baggage claims 6. Lost child. Assistance rendered by Benjamin Harper. The woman who found the report called over the facilities manager. The name rang a bell. Ben had retired from full-time work a few years back, but still filled in occasionally on night shifts when they needed help. He had worked there for over 20 years. Quiet, reliable, always on time, never one to make a fuss. The news spread internally first. A few of his old co-workers lit up when they heard the name. "That's Ben," someone said. "You mean Mr. Ben? He used to give extra cookies to the kids at Christmas. He's the one who fixed the vending machine on his day off, just because he didn't want people to lose their change." One of them found his number and called. Ben answered on the third ring. His voice was quiet, unsure. "Ben Harper?" the woman asked. "My name is Melanie. I work at the airport. I think you might have seen the speech last night." There was a pause. Then he exhaled slowly. "I saw it," he said. "Ben, I think she was talking about you, Emma. We found the report. It's you, isn't it?" Another pause. Then softly, "I think it might be. She wants to meet you. She asked if we could help find you." Ben's voice cracked a little. "She did?" "She did. And Ben, the whole country is talking about you." He did not know what to say. For a long time he had lived in a world that barely acknowledged he existed. Now the world had turned its gaze directly toward him, and he was unsure how to stand in its light. He agreed to talk to Emma. Quietly, carefully, with no cameras at first. He was not interested in fame. He only wanted to know how she had turned out, whether she had been all right, whether she had found her way after that night. And so, 15 years after he knelt beside a crying girl with a stuffed rabbit, the story that had once seemed small and forgotten began to unfold again. This time, the whole world was listening. The internet had a way of grabbing stories like Emma's and stretching them across every screen, every timeline, every corner of the digital world where people went to feel something real. Her speech, just a few minutes long, spread like a spark catching dry grass. Within hours, clips were posted on dozens of accounts. Within a day, those clips had been watched millions of times. Viewers left comments full of praise, reflection, and wonder. Some wrote about moments in their own lives where someone kind had stepped in quietly and helped them. Others simply asked the same question again and again: who was the janitor? News anchors picked up the story the following morning. They played the clip with reverent tones, pausing afterward to let the emotion linger. Radio stations debated whether this was the most powerful moment in an awards show all year. Talk show hosts teared up on camera. imagining their own children lost in a crowd and the relief of knowing someone decent would kneel down beside them. The hashtag #FindTheJanitor rose steadily until it trended nationally. Celebrities reposted the speech with captions like, "Faith in humanity, restored," and "Let's find this man." It was not just curiosity. There was something about the story that felt like an antidote to the usual noise of the internet. It was so simple. A janitor sees a frightened child, sits down beside her, and makes her feel safe. No ulterior motive, no glory, just 5 minutes of kindness. The kind of story people didn't see enough. And the fact that Emma had carried that moment for 15 years gave it a weight that no viral challenge or influencer stunt could replicate. People began searching in earnest. Internet sleuths combed through public records. Someone tried to reverse search old airport employment rosters, though few were publicly available. A few guessed at names based on Emma's original destination and time of year, narrowing down which airport might have been involved. Speculation turned to forums and message boards, some filled with genuine interest, others muddying the waters with false leads. One man claimed he was the janitor, but was quickly disproven when he could not remember basic details. The internet always had its noise. Back at the airport where it all happened, staff began to piece together the story more carefully. The security office received over 40 calls in a single day from journalists and curious citizens. The airport's communications director decided it was best to respond publicly and issued a statement confirming that records indicated a lost child incident had taken place around 15 years prior. The janitor on duty at the time, Benjamin Harper, had been listed on the official report. That name made its way online, quietly at first. A few smaller outlets posted about it, attaching old photos of Ben from airport newsletters. The image showed a man in his 40s, modestly dressed in the uniform of the facilities staff, standing in front of a row of polished trash bins. He was not smiling, not frowning either, just calm. The sort of man who did his work without needing anyone to clap for him. When the name reached Emma's team, they reacted quickly. She was already doing interviews, carefully balancing attention while protecting the dignity of the moment. She made it clear in every conversation that the story was not about her alone. She insisted it be about what the man had done and why it mattered. She was preparing for a scheduled appearance on a primetime news segment when her assistant handed her the name written on a sticky note. Emma read it once, then again. Her chest tightened. Ben Harper. It felt right. It sounded like a name she should have known all along. A name that had lived just beneath memory, waiting to be reawakened. She called the number that had been provided by the airport's staff liaison. She asked if she could speak with him. There was a long pause. Then the voice on the other end said softly, "He wants to talk to you." They arranged a private video call first. No cameras, no reporters, just the two of them. When the screen lit up and she saw his face, older now, weathered by time and quiet years, her breath caught. He looked surprised, almost apologetic, as if unsure he deserved to be remembered. But his eyes were exactly the same. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I found you," Emma said finally, her voice thick with emotion. Ben looked down, then back up. "I didn't think you would." I never stopped thinking about that night. He gave a slow nod, his expression caught between gratitude and disbelief. "You remember a lot more than I expected." Emma smiled gently. "I remember everything." They talked for nearly an hour. She told him about how that night had shaped her, about the work she did now, about the children she helped, and the people she tried to reach. He listened without interrupting, his hands folded in his lap. When she finished, he cleared his throat and said only one thing in return. "I'm proud of you." It was more than enough. After the call, Emma's team contacted the producers of the news segment she was set to appear on. The anchor, already moved by the story, asked if Emma would agree to a live interview. She said yes, but only if Ben agreed to appear as well. They asked him. He hesitated. He said he was not comfortable with attention, that he had not done anything remarkable. But Emma said something to him in response that made him pause. You may not want the spotlight, but the people who live in the shadows need to see that what they do matters. So he agreed. Not for the cameras, not for the applause. For the chance to sit beside the girl he had helped once, who now stood as a woman, determined to carry the same kindness forward. The day of the interview arrived. Ben was flown out, placed in a modest hotel, given a jacket that fit just a little too snug across his shoulders. He met Emma in the green room before they went on air. They did not need to rehearse anything. They already knew the story better than anyone else. When they walked onto the stage, the studio audience rose to their feet. The host welcomed them with warmth and wonder, asking questions with a gentleness not always found in broadcast news. Ben spoke softly, simply, without flair. He described the night with the same humility he had lived by for decades. Emma filled in the rest. And when the host asked Ben how it felt to be called a hero, he smiled faintly and said, I don't think heroes always wear uniforms. Sometimes they just carry mops. The audience applauded, not out of obligation, but because they understood that what they had witnessed was rare, something quiet, something lasting. And out there, across millions of screens, people stopped scrolling for just a moment and watched. They saw a man who had done the right thing when no one was watching. They saw a woman who had remembered. And they were reminded that in a world that moves too fast, slowing down for someone else might be the most powerful thing of all. The morning after the interview aired, Ben Harper's phone rang more times before noon than it had in the past 3 years combined. He had not gotten much sleep the night before. After the studio lights faded and the applause had died down, he had returned to his hotel room in a haze of quiet disbelief. The evening had unfolded like something borrowed from someone else's life. Sitting on the stage beside Emma, listening to her recount a memory that had become the very cornerstone of her journey, Ben had felt like he had wandered into a story and found himself at the center without knowing how he got there. In the hotel room, the walls had felt too clean, the air too still. He had sat for a long time in the armchair by the window, the city below blinking with light and movement. He had watched the traffic roll past and thought about how strange it was that something he had done in 5 minutes could return to him 15 years later like this. When he finally lay down, he could not quite fall asleep. His mind kept returning to the weight of Emma's hand on his shoulder during a commercial break, her whispered thank you that carried more weight than any crowd or award ever could. Now, back at home, things were different. His quiet life, which had once moved with the slow rhythm of sweeping floors and wiping windows, had been interrupted by phone calls from journalists, letters from strangers, and visits from neighbors who had never spoken to him beyond a polite nod. People recognized him now. When he went to the store, someone in the produce aisle would hesitate, then approach shyly. You are him, right? The janitor from the TV? I saw that story. It was beautiful. Thank you. He appreciated the kindness. Truly, he did. But part of him still found it bewildering. He had never sought recognition. For most of his life, he had been perfectly comfortable fading into the background. Being seen now, really seen, was both humbling and uncomfortable. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like the same man who still ironed his shirts on Sundays and made his coffee too strong. He took time to reply to as many letters as he could. Most were handwritten, some typed. Many were from people he had never met, telling him how his story had stirred something in them. A woman in Idaho wrote about how her grandfather had worked as a school custodian and how she had never understood the pride he took in that job until she watched Ben speak. A teenager from Boston said she had been thinking about quitting her volunteer work until she saw Emma's story and decided to keep going. A man who had once been homeless wrote to say that one night it had been a janitor who let him sleep in the warmth of a hallway and left a sandwich beside him without saying a word. He said watching Ben reminded him that small acts had ripples no one could see. Ben read each one slowly, carefully, with the kind of respect reserved for things of real value. He kept them in a shoebox under his bed, not because he wanted to save them for show, but because he wanted to remind himself that something good had come from something small, that had become the part he could accept. Not the praise, not the attention, but the truth that what he did had mattered. Emma kept in touch. They spoke regularly now, sometimes over the phone, sometimes through video calls. Their conversations drifted from updates on her nonprofit to questions about how he was doing. She had a way of making sure he knew she was listening, really listening, not just being polite. She would ask about his knees, about his garden, about whether he was eating well. He found himself opening up to her more than he had with anyone in years. She invited him to one of her events in Chicago, a conference where she was a featured speaker. He agreed to go, not because he was eager to be on display again, but because she asked him, like a friend would, not as someone looking for a story. At the event, he stood near the back, sipping coffee from a paper cup, watching her speak to hundreds of young people with a passion that felt both new and ancient. She carried herself with the same steadiness she had shown as a little girl, sitting on the cold airport floor, trying not to cry. After the speech, people came up to him again, not with awe this time, but with warmth. They shook his hand, told him about their own small moments, how they had learned that it was not always the loudest voices that changed lives. Some asked him questions. Others just wanted to say thank you. He took it all in with grace, even if he still felt a bit like an imposter in someone else's narrative. At one point during the trip, Emma pulled him aside and asked if he would consider speaking to a small group of high school students at a local outreach center. She promised it was informal. Just a few kids who were trying to figure out who they wanted to be. He hesitated. Public speaking was not something he ever imagined himself doing, but he trusted her, so he said yes. That evening he sat in a circle of plastic chairs under the flicker of a ceiling fan. The students leaned forward as he spoke. He told them about working nights, about being overlooked, about how easy it was to believe you did not matter if no one ever told you that you did. He told them about Emma, about how she had been scared, and how he had not known what to say, only that he had to sit down beside her. He told them he had not thought of it as heroic, just necessary, and how sometimes the necessary things are the ones that stay with people forever. When he finished, there was a quiet moment where no one said anything. Then one of the students, a girl with thick glasses and a notebook in her lap, raised her hand and asked, "Do you think everyone has a moment like that? A moment where they can be someone's safe place?" Ben looked around the room, then said, "I think everyone has 100 of those moments. Most of the time, we just do not know we are in one until it is long past." That answer stayed with the students. It stayed with Emma. And in time, it stayed with Ben, too. He began saying yes more often. He still preferred quiet, still moved through the world without fanfare, but he understood now that his story was not about him. It was about what people could be for each other, what they often were without realizing it. He was still Ben. He still woke early, still made his coffee too strong, still walked with a slight limp. But now, when he looked in the mirror, he saw a little more than a tired man in a plain shirt. He saw a life that had mattered in ways he had not expected. He saw the reflection of someone who had helped a child, and in doing so, had helped her help the world. And when he thought of that night at the airport, he no longer remembered it as a blur of fluorescent light and late-shift fatigue. He remembered a small hand slipping into his, a soft voice saying thank you, a glove turned into a puppet, and the moment, just a moment, when two people had found something rare and lasting in the middle of an ordinary night. The reunion was set to take place in a quiet studio just outside the city. No live audience this time. No media circus. Emma had insisted on that. She wanted their first meeting in person after all these years to be something real, something they could hold in their hands without the noise of the world pressing in. The network had agreed to film it, of course. They would air it later as a feature, but the cameras would be unobtrusive, positioned like gentle observers rather than hungry eyes. There would be no teleprompters, no rehearsals, just two people sitting across from each other, sharing the same space for the first time since a girl named Emma had clutched a stuffed rabbit at baggage claim 6. Ben arrived early. He always did. He wore a simple button-down shirt, sleeves rolled neatly at the wrist. His hair, grayer now than it had been, was combed back the way he had done since his 20s. His hands were steady, though his breath felt a little tight in his chest. He had faced attention already, done interviews and answered questions, but this was different. This was not a speech or a spotlight. This was her. He walked slowly through the quiet hallway that led to the set. A young production assistant greeted him, smiling with the kind of reverence people had started to show him. She guided him to a small waiting area where he sat alone with his thoughts. He looked around the room, its walls decorated with soft portraits of past interviewees, framed in warm lighting. There was a pitcher of water on a side table, untouched. He leaned back in the chair, resting one ankle over his knee, and closed his eyes for a moment. It was not that he was afraid. He had nothing to fear from Emma, but he did not know what it would be like to see her again, not through a screen or filtered through public moments, but face to face. The last time they had seen each other, she had been small, fragile in the way children are when they feel adrift. He remembered the softness of her voice, the way her fingers had curled around the handle of her rabbit. Now she was a woman with a voice that moved thousands. That was a leap few people got to witness with their own eyes. The door creaked open. He looked up. Emma stood there, her figure outlined by the light behind her. She wore a simple dress, no makeup beyond what the cameras required, her hair pulled back loosely. In her hands, she held marbles. The same rabbit, aged and worn, still unmistakable. Their eyes met, and for a moment the room held its breath. Ben stood, slowly, unsure of what to say. "Hi," she said softly. "Hello," he replied, his voice thick. Emma stepped closer, her eyes glistening. She reached out and embraced him without hesitation, her arms wrapping around his frame with a kind of familiarity that did not require time to explain. He hugged her back, tentative at first, then fully, as if recognizing something in her that had never changed. When they sat down across from each other on the set, the crew remained quiet, respectful. The cameras rolled, but no one spoke. Ben and Emma settled into their chairs, and for a moment, neither spoke. They just looked at each other, absorbing the reality of what was happening. "You look just like I remember," Emma said finally, her voice a mix of wonder and warmth. Ben chuckled quietly. "A little grayer, maybe. But the eyes," she said. "Same kindness, same calm." He folded his hands in his lap. "I never thought I'd see you again. I didn't think you'd remember." "I never forgot," she said. "Not once. That night changed everything." Ben tilted his head. "How so?" Emma took a breath. "I was afraid of everything after that. I had nightmares for months, waking up thinking I'd lost my parents again. But every time I thought about the fear, I also thought about you. The way you just sat with me, no rush, no judgment. You made me feel like I mattered, even when I was crying and scared and lost. That stayed with me." Ben looked down, his eyes misting. "You made me feel human when I was too small to ask for that," she said. "And later, when I grew up, when I saw other people hurting or overlooked or left behind, I thought, what would that janitor do? And the answer was always the same. He'd sit beside them. He'd see them." Ben exhaled slowly, his throat tight. "I didn't think it would be remembered like that. For me, it was just a moment. One night. I've had a lot of them. But for me," she said, leaning forward, "it was the moment, the one that mattered most." He nodded, not trusting his voice. They spoke for a long time, about what had happened in the years between, about the work Emma had done, the paths she had followed, the people she had tried to help. Ben listened with quiet pride, asking questions when he could. He spoke about his work, too, about the janitor's life, about the things he had seen from behind his mop bucket and his cart. Stories of kindness, yes, but also loneliness, grief, small victories that went unnoticed. Emma listened intently. She did not let her eyes wander or her mind drift. She honored every word, just as he had once honored her fear. At one point, a crew member handed her a small folder. Inside was a printout of the moment from her speech, a still frame of her holding marbles on stage. She handed it to Ben. "I want you to have this," she said, "because even if you didn't ask for credit, you deserve to know the impact." Ben took the photo, his hands trembling slightly. He studied it for a long time. "I've never had anything like this," he said. "You have it now." They sat in silence, the kind of silence that comes after something important has been said. Eventually, the cameras stopped rolling. The crew thanked them both, but no one rushed them off set. Emma and Ben remained for a while longer, talking, remembering. When they finally stood, Emma hugged him again, longer this time. As they walked out together into the light of the hallway, something had shifted. The story that had started with a frightened child and a janitor had come full circle, not in a dramatic twist or a scripted climax, but in a quiet meeting between two people who had never stopped meaning something to each other. Ben drove home that evening with the photo resting on the passenger seat. He looked at it at red lights, unsure whether to laugh or cry. When he got home, he placed it on the small table by the window. It stood beside the shoebox of letters and a coffee mug that said, "You matter more than you know." And for the first time in years, Ben Harper went to sleep with a heart full of something he had almost forgotten how to feel. Not just peace, but purpose. It started with a letter. A girl named Liana had written to Ben after watching his interview with Emma. She was 17 and lived in a small town in the Midwest. In her letter, she explained how she had grown up watching her mother mop floors in a hospital after night shifts at a diner. She wrote about how people barely looked at her mom, how they stepped over her bucket, left trash on the floor, and never said thank you. But when she saw Ben on television, she said, it felt like someone had finally said her mother mattered, that people like her mother mattered. She ended the letter with a question that clung to Ben's mind long after he had finished reading it. "Do you think someone like my mom can change the world, too?" He had written back, slowly and by hand, because he felt it deserved more than a quick reply. He told Liana he did not think people had to wear titles or capes to change the world. Sometimes they just had to care when no one else did. Sometimes they just had to show up, mop in hand, tired feet, and still find the strength to be kind. "Yes," he wrote, "I think your mother already has." The letter exchange sparked something in him that he could not quite explain. He had spent most of his life avoiding the spotlight, avoiding the weight of anyone's expectations. But now, the attention had come and gone, and what remained was not noise or pressure but a quiet responsibility, a gentle question that had taken root in his heart. What now? He was not young anymore. His knees complained more often than they used to. He moved slower, felt the strain in his back from years of lifting and bending. But his mind still turned with clarity, and his heart, stirred by Emma's story and the letters that continued to arrive, was restless. He decided to visit the local community center, a modest building with peeling paint and a flickering sign, the kind of place people only noticed when they needed something. He spoke to the director, a woman named Carla, who had run the place for years with little funding and a lot of stubbornness. She recognized him immediately. She had seen the interview, of course, and before he could even explain why he had come, she smiled and said, "We were hoping you'd stop by." He offered to help however he could. He did not know what that would look like yet. Carla handed him a stack of flyers and told him about a small scholarship program they had tried to start but never had the funds to sustain. It was for children of maintenance staff, cafeteria workers, custodians, people whose jobs rarely came with recognition or college plans. Ben took the idea home with him. He sat at his kitchen table that night, staring at the paperwork, the numbers scribbled in the margins. He did not have much in savings, but he had enough to start something. Just enough for one scholarship, one student, one chance. He named it after his wife Eleanor, who had passed away quietly 10 years earlier after a long illness. She had been a school librarian, someone who believed deeply in the value of every child's potential. She had loved the quiet ones most, the ones who sat in the back of the room and never raised their hands but always came to her after class. The scholarship would bear her name and live in her spirit. The Eleanor Harper Opportunity Grant. With Carla's help and Emma's endorsement, the scholarship fund began to take shape. Emma offered to match the first donation. She did not even blink when she said it. She believed in it as much as he did. Soon others followed. Donations came in from teachers, janitors, nurses, retired mechanics, parents who had never been able to afford college but believed someone else's kid should have the chance. Ben found himself speaking again, this time in smaller rooms, with folding chairs and donut boxes on the back table. He spoke at schools and union meetings, not with a script, but with a simple story that had become part of him. A story about a little girl, a stuffed rabbit, and the 5 minutes that had changed everything. People listened. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they stood and shared their own stories. He never considered himself a public speaker. He stumbled over his words sometimes, paused too long, lost his place. But he spoke with sincerity, and that proved to be more powerful than polish. People trusted him, not because he told them what to do, but because he reminded them of what they already knew, that their lives mattered, even when no one clapped for them. One evening, after a local news segment aired about the scholarship program, Ben came home to find a stack of envelopes stuffed into his mailbox. Inside were applications, letters, photos of young people who wanted a chance to go to school. Many came from families who had never dared to dream that far ahead. He read every letter. He highlighted names. He made notes in the margins. It overwhelmed him at first, the sheer need of it all. But then he remembered Emma's words. You may not want the spotlight, but the people who live in the shadows need to see that what they do matters. So he kept going. He started keeping a small notebook with him. Inside it, he wrote down quotes he heard during his visits, phrases from teenagers, lunch ladies, bus drivers, little bits of wisdom and pain and humor that made up the lives of people rarely invited to speak. One page read, "My dad wakes up at 4 every morning and still smiles when he gets home." Another read, "I want to be the first janitor in my family to go to college." The scholarship fund grew, slowly but steadily. They awarded the first recipient in a modest ceremony at the community center. A girl named Janelle, whose father worked nights cleaning offices downtown, stood with her parents as Carla handed her the check. She cried when she thanked Ben. He hugged her quietly and told her to write him when she graduated. Ben found himself changing in ways he had not expected. He began to walk with more energy. He started spending mornings in the community garden, where kids from the neighborhood helped plant vegetables and flowers. He bought a new pair of shoes, not for fashion, but because his old ones had worn through. He smiled more often. Not the quiet, polite kind, but real, wide smiles that crinkled his eyes and softened his entire face. People still approached him, still recognized him, but now the conversations felt different. Less about the interview, more about the work. They asked how they could help, how they could give, and he welcomed them in, every single one. One afternoon, while sorting through a new stack of letters, he found a small envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo of a janitor sitting with a child beside a baggage claim carousel. The angle was distant, a security camera still, a grainy moment frozen in time. Attached was a note that said, "You never knew we saved this. Thought you should have it. M.S. Airport Security." Ben held the photo for a long time. It was him, it was Emma, and there, just off to the side, was Marbles. That small moment, captured without fanfare, now lived in his hands. He framed it and placed it on the wall of the community center's front office. People asked about it when they walked in. Carla would point and say, "That's where it all began." And Ben, hearing those words, would smile and think to himself that maybe beginnings were not always loud. Maybe they were just quiet choices made in empty corridors, with tired feet and open hearts. And maybe those were the moments that made all the difference. 1 year after the reunion, Ben Harper sat in the front row of a grand auditorium in Washington, D.C., surrounded by people dressed in fine suits and elegant dresses. The crowd was murmuring softly, a gentle hum of anticipation rolling through the wide hall. Behind him, hundreds of attendees had gathered for the Global Humanitarian Summit, an annual event where leaders, innovators, and advocates from all over the world came to share ideas and celebrate progress. The room sparkled under tall chandeliers, and banners bearing the summit's motto lined the walls, "Compassion in Action." Ben sat quietly, his hands resting in his lap. He wore a dark blazer that Emma had helped him pick out, tailored just enough to fit his narrow frame. He looked around the room with quiet eyes, noticing details others might not. The slight tremor in the hands of the woman seated beside him as she folded her notes. The anxious fidgeting of a young man in the second row who was clearly about to speak. The way the stage lights reflected in the polished floor, making the room glow with an almost otherworldly warmth. He felt out of place, as he often did in places like this. The seat beneath him was too plush, the space too formal. Still, he remained. He had been invited not just as a guest, but as an honoree in a small, private way, Emma had insisted. She was the keynote speaker that evening, and she had asked that Ben be there, seated right up front where he could see her clearly. She wanted him to hear her words. She had said they were his, too. The lights dimmed gradually. The chatter settled into silence. A soft voice from the overhead speakers introduced the next speaker with reverence and admiration. Emma Stone, founder and director of the Quiet Light Foundation, was called to the stage. Applause followed as she walked across the wide floor with confident steps. She wore a dark green dress, simple and graceful, and she carried nothing but a small, worn stuffed rabbit in one hand. Ben smiled when he saw Marbles. That rabbit had become a symbol not just of a memory, but of everything that had followed it. The foundation Emma had built now worked with underserved youth across dozens of communities. It offered mentorships, scholarships, mental health resources, and emergency support for families in need. And at the core of it all was the belief that small acts of kindness could change a life. Emma reached the podium and paused before speaking. The room waited. The cameras blinked red from the back, broadcasting her face to viewers all around the world. She looked out over the audience, and when her gaze fell on Ben, she smiled. Not a public smile, a personal one. "I want to begin tonight," she said, "by introducing you to someone who changed my life without ever knowing he did." She gestured gently toward the front row, and every head turned toward Ben. "This is Ben Harper," she continued. "Some of you may know his story by now. You've seen the interviews or heard the speeches. But I want you to hear it again, not because it is dramatic or flashy, but because it is the story of what happens when a person chooses to care." She told them about the night at the airport. She told it slowly, without embellishment, letting the simplicity of it speak for itself. She described how she had been a frightened 6-year-old, separated from her parents in the middle of a vast, humming terminal, and how a janitor had noticed her crying and stopped. He had not just called for help, he had sat down, he had stayed, he had turned a glove into a puppet and made her laugh when she had forgotten how. She told the room how that single act had shaped her understanding of the world, how it had taught her that kindness does not need a stage, it only needs presence. "When we think of heroes," she said, "we often picture people in uniforms, in headlines, with medals and ceremonies. But some heroes wear work boots and carry mops. Some heroes are so quiet you don't even realize they've saved you until years later, when you finally understand what they gave you. Ben listened, his heart open and full. He did not squirm as he used to. He had grown more comfortable with being seen, not because he enjoyed it, but because he knew what it meant to others. He had learned to accept that his story was not just his own anymore. It belonged to every person who had ever been overlooked, every worker who had gone unnoticed, every child who had needed someone to kneel beside them in a moment of fear. Emma continued her speech, moving into stories of the Foundation's growth, the students they had helped, the families they had supported. She spoke about the challenges and triumphs, about the lessons learned along the way. She held marbles in her hand the entire time, sometimes raising it to emphasize a point, sometimes letting it rest against the podium like an anchor. Near the end of her speech, she paused again. I keep this rabbit with me not because I am clinging to the past, but because it reminds me of where all this began. It reminds me that the smallest moment can hold the greatest power. And I hope, she said, her voice steady, that every person in this room remembers that someone like Ben Harper is not rare. He is everywhere. In our schools, in our hospitals, in our airports and offices and sidewalks. We just have to slow down enough to see him. The room erupted into applause. Not just polite clapping, but a full standing ovation. People rose to their feet and turned to Ben, clapping not just for a man, but for what he represented. For every quiet act of decency that goes unnoticed. For every soul who chooses kindness when the world is not watching. Ben stood slowly, his eyes glassy but his back straight. He nodded once, placing a hand over his chest. He did not wave. He did not bow. He just stood and let the moment pass through him like a wave. Later that evening, after the summit ended and the lights dimmed and the chairs were stacked, Ben and Emma sat alone on the edge of the stage, their feet dangling above the floor. Marbles sat between them. I still don't think I deserve all this, Ben said softly. Emma looked at him, her expression gentle. You didn't ask for it. That's what makes it true. They sat there for a while longer, watching the staff clean up the remnants of a grand event, the irony not lost on either of them. The quiet workers sweeping the aisles, folding the tablecloths, lifting the weight behind the scenes. Ben nodded toward them. They're the real show, he said. Emma smiled. That's why we're here. When Ben left the auditorium that night, he walked with a steady step. He did not feel younger exactly, but he felt lighter. As he passed through the hallway lined with portraits of past honorees, he noticed an empty frame on the wall near the exit, a small placard beneath it that read, "The Quiet Legacy Award, to be announced." Ben did not need to know if his name would ever go there. That was not the point. The point was that his story was not about awards. It was about a choice he had made a long time ago, to stop, to sit, and to care. That choice had echoed through years, across lives, and now into a future he could not have imagined. And as he stepped into the night, into the soft air and the hush of a sleeping city, he thought of Emma as a child, reaching for his hand, and how, just by holding it, she had carried him forward too.